Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Well, everybody, I knew because of how it started that this game would not go well. I'll talk about it in just a second, but thanks for checking in to the best Houston sports podcast. Welcome to our live Texans Ravens post-game show. Robert here with Sports Radio 610 Shaun Bijani. And Shaun, you want to know how I knew this game was going to go bad?
Tell me more.
Well, because minutes before the game, I leave my place to go do something. I come back, tried to turn on my Comcast Xfinity app, was planning to watch the game on there. It wasn't working. So my only choice was to watch the game with my antenna, which thankfully I had set up, but I live in an apartment, so I wasn't getting the clearest signal. So there was a lot of, digital audio all through the first half. And I'm trying to see what's going on with the video. It's, I can see enough. I got the idea of most of the plays. Luckily, Shaun, CBS, their production quality is so poor that it wasn't like I missed a lot of good replays because they don't tend to give you a lot of good replays on CBS.
Yeah. Sorry about the technical issues that you had. It appeared that the Texans had their own issues. If you could see and hear enough of that today, they looked like a team that was coached by a first-year NFL head coach, a first-year offensive coordinator and play caller, and a rookie quarterback. And a lot of it looked pretty close to, I think, what we all should have expected. It was certainly what I expected, but I think all said and done, pretty encouraging.
Yeah, we're going to get to the encouraging. I want everybody, though, to get in the comments. We want to hear from you. But in the meantime, I want to unpack this game possession by possession. We'll start with the first defensive series. Grenard with a sack on 3rd and 2. Very good game for him. 4 solo tackles, the sack, 1 QB hit, and 2 tackles for loss. But Shaun, I wanted to ask you about the Texans' first offensive series because you had a 3-and-out. Stroud with a pass deflected on 2nd down, and on 3rd down, a long screen that looked like many Texans offenses in the past because it was a screenplay that took a while to set up and didn't go anywhere. But they get a roughing the punter penalty, making it 4th and short. What did you think about them going for it on 4th down with the rookie QB in his first series?
I didn't mind the Texans going for it on that first 4th and 1 because, it wasn't like they had any momentum really going. But I thought that it was a really good, effort for DeMeco to kind of instill confidence, and to show the team, because you've heard him talk about the confidence that he has in his guys, but this is, his first NFL regular season game. You got an opportunity to show the confidence that you have. I just thought, man, that the play call on the 4th and 1, it took too long to develop. Like, you needed to go with something quick there. Because the pass rush, early going, it was dialed up. They were going to try to fluster Stroud, which they did. He looked calm, cool, and collected. But, in terms of just the game, there wasn't much he could do. You had to get something going that was going to be able to hit fast, and they just couldn't do it.
Yeah, I didn't like the play call because it was a lot of stuff going one direction. So you got to count on the Ravens doing something that they don't do. They don't make the mistake of not – this is a veteran team as far as staying at home and doing those sort of – that was my problem. It's just the play call on that situation because I'm all about taking chances, especially if you're anywhere close to midfield or beyond that.
Yeah. Look, that would have been about the only 4th down that I would have gone for outside of the one, late in the game. I think it was like 4th and 13 on their second to final possession of the ball game. The other one that was 4th and short around the same, area of the field, it just didn't make sense. But, those are things like that's kind of having a pulse of the game. That's kind of understanding your capabilities, maybe, right? The kind of style that you want to play with, the mentality that you want to play with, but sometimes, DeMeco's going to learn this. I guarantee you're going to hear it at least once today in his post-game press conference where it's on me, I'll have to do better, that sort of a thing. And it's going to be true because he's got to understand that, the pulse that maybe he has from a player's perspective, the lens that he's viewing, calling this game from, making the final decision isn't always the one that, you need to have as a head coach. There's maybe a little bit different of a pulse, if you will.
Yeah, DeMeco, I didn't have as much problem with in this game. But of course, he's in charge with his coordinators, and I want to get to one of the coordinators as we move along in the game. But let's go to the next possession because MJ Nelson, an interception on the second series. Again, the Texans offense, though, goes nowhere. A Tunsil holding penalty pretty much blew up that drive. Holding was very questionable. But the one I want to ask you about, third drive, Ravens go 9 plays, 58 yards on a touchdown, ends with a 4-yard TD run by Dobbins. And it reminded me way too much, I guess, of those, just easy drives that we saw all last year, Shaun. This was very resemblant of that. We're going to get to a couple more that started the second half. But, this is the type of stuff that scares me because I feel like I've been watching this on replay the last couple of years already.
Yeah, I mean, that drive looked a little bit easier for the Ravens, probably than it actually was. There was a missed tackle on a play that, the Ravens ended up converting a first down on the right side. They never showed the replay of that, and it just kind of flashed. And I don't know who actually was charged with that missed tackle, but it was a play that should have been made. Would have stopped well short, maybe 4 or 5 yards short of the first down in that instance. And then the following play when Lamar was able to find Zay Flowers wide open between like a zone coverage, it was Tavier Thomas and Jalen Petrie. Petrie playing over the top. Thomas just kind of dropped back and sat down, and Flowers continued on his route near the left sideline, and it was an easy just pitch and catch for Jackson and Flowers. I just wondered if there was a mix-up. If maybe Tavier should have carried Flowers a little bit deeper to Petrie, who, seemed to fly over late. I expected to see some type of miscommunication, on in all facets of this game, really, just because it's new. There's so much new. And we'd not seen Tavier in this type of a role, really yet at all during his career. You missed a little bit of Desmond King in that instance, I think, but look, there's what made these drives and that particular one look a little bit easier than I think it actually was. It was good coverage outside of that particular play, but it's just Lamar Jackson's ability to just kind of extend plays and make things happen with his feet, which he did a number of times today, especially early on.
So Stroud's third drive, he's got Robert Woods wide open down the field on second down, but just flat out missed him. It was very reminiscent of Davis Mills, where he just misses a wide open guy. That was a little frustrating. 0 first downs on Stroud's first 3 drives. I'm going to flip it positive on Stroud as we go along in this, Shaun. But let's get to the Ravens' fourth drive where, it was the midfield. Jalen Petrie, safety blitz on 3rd and 10. Good defensive play call by DeMeco. But let's get to that fourth Texans drive. Stroud finally with some first downs, thanks to Robert Woods. 15 plays, 67-yard drive, 9 minutes off the clock. They get a field goal. It ends when Bobby Slowick calls for a backward screen, 3rd and 5. And this is where I had my problems, Shaun, with Bobby Slowick on the day. I started getting some Kubiak and O'Brien nightmares because just some kind of like giveaway screens on 3rd and more distance. And not just that, the screens weren't to who you need them to be to, which is Tank Dell, your playmaker, or even Damian Pierce. It's to Woods. I just didn't get the play call right there.
The play call, I don't like it, to begin with, outside of the result. But that play, the little screen to Noah Brown on that 3rd and 5, it was a bad play call. But look, say what you will, you got to pick up the block. And the initial block that needed to be made for that play to even have a chance wasn't made. And that's the problem with those screens run in any instance, 1st or 3rd down. You have to have that initial block. The only reason you do that is because you're putting that ball into a guy's hands who you feel like can make a play. They give the ball to Brown there because I think they believe he's a tough guy, can get some yak. Once he sticks his foot in the ground, turn it up, gain some momentum. But it could have been Dell, it could have been Woods, it could have been anybody. It doesn't make a damn difference if you don't pick up that initial block. And you saw on that drive, Stroud taking chances, fitting balls into tight windows to Robert Woods, to extend the drive initially on a 3rd and 5. That was awesome. Hit Woods again a few plays later for another first down. It looked like they'd hit a rhythm when he found Collins as well in back-to-back first down opportunities. So when you're facing another 3rd and 5 and you want to extend that drive, you got to get something going towards the chains. I hate the idea. I hate the philosophy that, you know what, we're going to give it to a playmaker. Don't care who it is, but running anything behind the chains with that pass rush, with that swarming Ravens defense, I just didn't like it. The play calling bothered me a lot today, especially in those instances on 3rd down.
Yeah, it's not just that particular play call. It's where you are on the field when you make that play. You can get some room with the screen if you've got a lot more open field in front of you. And I just mentioned Tank Dell because I looked at the end of the 3rd quarter and Tank Dell had 2 targets total. And we had plays that were set up for guys specifically. None of them looked like they were set up specifically for Tank Dell. And I just thought the Texans didn't do a good enough job of getting into their playmakers. Look, Devin Singletary, and I want to say just a second on Devin Singletary, Shaun. He's not looked good running the football, period. He's a good guy out of the backfield to catch passes, but he's not looked good running the football. And there were times in this game where I'm like, Dameon Pierce has got 10 carries after 3 quarters where I just was like, can we not get Dameon Pierce the ball a little bit more earlier in the game and get him established somewhat before we bring in Devin Singletary against a team that you knew was going to be coming all out at your quarterback? And I'm not happy with, Devin Singletary, period, at this point, and the way he's running the football. That's preseason and regular season so far.
Yeah, it was tough for him. Just 21 yards on 7 carries today. His best run, I think, came on his first touch, which was pretty similar to the result that you'd saw from Dameon Pierce get all day, which is, 4 yards, pretty good start. But it was tough for the Texans to kind of get into any rhythm running the football, even after running on first down. Just that Ravens defensive line, I think, was doing so many different things up front that it became evident if you were passing it, if you were running it, there was just massive issues, I think, for the Texans on, making those line calls, figuring out what the Ravens were going to do, stepping towards their blocks, holding their blocks. And look, the penalties, they ended up costing the Texans a lot as well, killed some drives, especially on 3rd down, made some manageable situations just near impossible in some instances. But the encouraging thing is that I never really saw anybody get rattled. I never saw like early frustrations leak out of anybody, whether it be the offensive line, the running backs, or even CJ Stroud, or even the sideline. So, we're limited to what we can see, but I think in that sense, it's encouraging. And if you notice towards the end of the game, right at the end of the game, when Stroud was coming off, before I guess he realized he was going to get the ball back on that final drive to get some free yards, Jonathan Grenard and Will Anderson, both kind of dapped him up, said, hey, man, keep your head up. It's okay. You did good today. And I think that's probably going to be the message throughout this team is like, hey, you know where we're at. We knew this was going to be a tough game, a litmus test. They probably wouldn't use that terminology, but it was, and it was going to be exactly just that. So you see where you're at right now. And I think you have to trust that, DeMeco Ryans and a lot of these veterans, now's where you dig in and you put the real work in. Yeah,
Shaun, you talking about attitude. I don't think Texans fans want to hear that right now. We want to see execution. We haven't seen execution for 3 years.
Okay, don't expect it from a rookie quarterback and a rookie head coach. I know you want to see it, but I mean, let's be real about it.
Yeah, my issue wasn't with the rookie head coach execution or the rookie quarterback. And I talked about Slowick, but there was just a lot of guys. I'm talking about players out there that just were not doing their job. Of course, a lot of that's the offensive line. I want to get to that in a second, but let's get to the next Ravens possession. Petrie again, safety blitz on 3rd down, forces an incompletion. Unfortunately, that's the last we saw of him because of a chest injury. But DeMeco dialing it up on defense, and I was happy for the most part with DeMeco and the way he dialed it up on defense and tried to mix things up and stuff like that. It was just guys I felt like weren't executing for him the way they should have. That leaves Stroud with his first shot at a 2-minute drill. And this is the good thing with the game because he goes 11 plays, 68 yards, 1 minute 54, sets up a Fairbairn field goal. Yeah, he got huge help from a roughing the passer on 3rd and 15. But you talk about this team not losing composure. You're talking about CJ Stroud, because he was the one guy I thought out there that showed total composure the whole game, despite the fact that he was dealing with jailbreaks a lot of time from the offensive line, an offensive line, given that they're banged up, but they just didn't look like they knew where to be. They weren't picking up the stunts that the Ravens were doing and stuff like that. But CJ Stroud, he kept it together the whole time. And that 2-minute drill was something that just, I thought, okay, he's doing stuff now.
Yeah. I think, for him to be as calm, cool, collected, composed, that was probably the most encouraging thing for the entire day. Now, when you really talk football, just being able to, just out of sight, out of mind, just trusting your ability, fitting balls into tight windows, not being afraid to, make certain throws. There was one, and I kind of got nervous during the broadcast of these guys talking about, updating what Richardson was doing with the Colts, what Young was doing with the Panthers, all these other rookie quarterbacks, around the league and performances. And man, look at what Burrow and Watson are looking like right now in that battle. CJ Stroud hasn't, thrown an interception yet. And I felt like 2 minutes after they had said that initially, he throws an out route where it was completed to Robert Woods by like that much, man, just a hair on your chinny chin, where there was a great stop identification by the corner who almost jumped that route, but didn't. And it was like, wow, that still, like, it was a completion, but that might be a read that maybe Stroud wishes he had back. Go back at the film and see who else he maybe could have thrown the ball to there. But I think all in all, from a football sense, you didn't see any, throws where you were like, oh, man, why, what was he seeing there? Maybe there was one. I had to go back and look. But I think that's another encouraging sign that you saw today from Stroud.
Yeah, and that's been the theme all through we talked about it through preseason. We talked about it through training camp, and we saw some interceptions, in training camp, but for the most part, Stroud has looked pretty good outside of that first drive, his first drive period in preseason. Mm-hmm. He's looked pretty good as far as taking care of the football.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, even the interceptions in training camp, he had a really, I'm not going to say bad, but he threw the bulk of his interceptions in probably, I don't know, 4 practices, it was all kind of bunched together. And that was like midway through camp. And as it went along, it was like, what, maybe the one thing you really worry about with Stroud is not throwing interceptions, but it's holding on to the ball too long. And, how much of that is actually, the receivers just an ability to get open, or him being flushed from the pocket because protection breaks down. I think that more than anything else today, it was pretty evident that, look, this offensive line, it's going to be what it's going to be for at least the next month, right? So they've got to figure out a way to kind of shore some things up. Bobby Slowick, I think, going to really take a long, hard look at his play calling and in certain situations and say, I got to put Stroud in a better position to make a play here. Let him get the ball out faster, not trust. This might be a great play built for pretty solid protection. They didn't get that today, and they're not going to be facing, a top 2 defense every single week like the Ravens in this pass rush and, the different stunts and twists that these linebackers and ends like to run. But I would say just that in and of itself really rang true today. He held the ball too long, and I still think it's a fair criticism, even though there's instances where that one, he rolled out to his left, took a big sack. I think it was like 11 or 12 yard loss. Nothing he could do about it himself. You can't say get rid of the ball. His body's not in position to do that. And if he does, then that's real disaster. But it's Slowick putting him in position and him recognizing, what? I got to get rid of the ball faster. Like, don't allow my body to be in that position. Don't try to, extend. I think you did see a little bit of that today from Stroud.
Yeah, there was a couple of times you beat me to the punch, because that's the first drive of the second half. He's running for his life. Mm-hmm. First play of the half, he takes that 11-yard sack, another 3 and out. The Ravens just walk it down the field the next drive. 8 plays, 71-yard drive. Justice Hill with a short TD run, making it worse. The Texans get an offsides penalty on the extra point. So the Ravens go for 2 and it's 15-6. And man, that was the frustrating thing, Shaun. They just seem to compound their own errors with the penalties. And it just, I don't know. You just felt like the penalties were always at these real crucial junctures. But I guess when you're a team that's not that good, they all seem crucial when you can't move the ball and you can't stop anybody at times.
No, I mean, but it felt that way really because it was. And that's what teams, already kind of behind the 8 ball, it's hard to avoid because there is so much new. And this was the first time these guys were on the field together in an actual setting that matters. It's your first game for a lot of guys, but first game where everything matters. And look, if it wasn't Laramie Tunsil false starting, if it wasn't a phantom hold, if it wasn't, other legitimate penalties, holding, pass interference, stuff like that, those are things where against really good teams, I think I said this to you the other day or somebody when we were talking about it, they were like, hey, what do you expect? And I said, well, you know what? At the end of the day, I expect win or lose for the Texans to look like a team that's just not as talented, or not as experienced. And that's exactly what you saw. And it came down to, the penalties and just execution. Funny thing is at halftime, I tweeted this out. I was looking at the penalties. It was 9 penalties for 82 yards for the Ravens and just maybe like 4 for the Texans at that point in time. And the time of possession, the Texans won it. They were in the ball game. If you just took a snapshot of the box score and you didn't know any better, I think you would have thought that this was not a game in Baltimore, but rather this feels and looks like a game at NRG Stadium because of the penalties. It didn't look like a team that was being rattled by the environment and the noise and all of this and that. As the game went along, it certainly, turned out to be as such, though.
Yeah, the first half, there was a penalty on Tunsil that most of us thought he didn't deserve on a holding.
Yeah, it was
one of the penalties was on MJ Nelson, which was a pass interference. I believe he had a pass interference, which it cost you a lot of yards. So the yardage was not. The number of penalties was definitely in the Ravens' favor, but the yardage was pretty close because of that MJ Nelson. I think it was a 26-yard penalty or something like that. Now the Texans next drive.
Oh, the Steven Nelson PI, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, not MJ, Steven. Yeah,
you're
Steven
meshing
Nelson.
the two, yeah.
Yeah, I made him into one person. Texans next drive, 4.5 yard or so on their side of the field. Texans try to rush up to the line, but for some reason, which I didn't understand, they didn't explain it. The refs don't let the Texans snap the ball. At that point, Shaun, that's where I pull the plug on going for it. And this is my only big issue with DeMeco the whole game. Because the first 4th down, I thought, okay, not terrible, but I don't like the play call. That's not DeMeco. This is DeMeco because you got a Ravens team that's now ready to set up. And it wasn't just they were ready. It was almost as though there had been a timeout call. So they had all day for this. And I just didn't agree with this going for it right there. It just didn't make any sense at all.
100%. You're right. Even with your technical issues and watching this game, with your feed, I had to go look on Twitter and see what was going on there, why it took so long. And I think that I found this explanation a couple of times that there was a substitution made. And so because the Texans were making a sub, the Ravens were allowed to make a sub, and then you go and you play that 4th down. Well, I agree with you. And I think everybody does. At that point in time, you have to squash it because the whole idea of going for it in that instance where you're at on the field, which is like around your own 45, 46 yard line, whatever it was, pretty close to midfield, same area where you'd failed before. And what you did before doesn't matter, but it's about having that pulse. DeMeco, I think if you asked him with a gun to his head today, if he'd felt like the urgency of situations, he'd have to say no going back and looking at it. And that was one of those instances where I'd felt like he'd felt it initially, but because it took so darn long to get it going, he was just hell-bent on like, you know what, let's go. Doesn't matter. We're doing this. And you just can't do it. I mean, 10 times out of 10, you have to punt the ball there.
Yeah, it's the feel of the game. And this is what you need to see from head coaches.
Mm-hmm.
So Stingley commits an obvious pass interference which kind of mars a game where he was pretty quiet, meaning, we didn't see him doing a lot of other bad stuff. But this sets up the second straight Ravens touchdown, 22-6. But Shaun, here was what was more disappointing for me than any of that was it was the Texans their first offensive play after those two terrible defensive possessions. They couldn't get a play in and had to call a timeout. Shaun, I feel like it's unforgivable to not get a play in after a kickoff. No reason why you shouldn't have a play before you walk out on the field after a long timeout like that, which, they didn't just have the touchdown, but they had the long timeout too.
Yeah, and that was, I just got done talking about the urgency and the pulse being wrong for DeMeco. You could see this play out on your television screen. At that instance, the Texans were done a solid by the referees, in my opinion, and even granting them the timeout. The play clock had already hit 0 before DeMeco nonchalantly calls for timeout. They didn't have to give it to him. It was like somebody's in his ear. They're talking about a play or what had just happened or something like that. And they're like, oh, call a timeout. And he's like, oh, yeah, timeout. It was late. And the Texans got that. And it's just that's another instance where if you're a head coach, you've got to be dialed into the game, not what just happened on defense, not what is coming up on offense. You have guys to do that. You have got to have the pulse on the game. And I think that's an area where DeMeco's going to have to improve. That's an area in which everybody's going to have to improve.
But that's
he's not the only one that needs to call the timeout.
That's
There's
not
a lot
his.
of other.
No. I'm saying that's not his job. Yeah, you had to call a timeout there. It's not DeMeco's fault that they had to call a timeout there. The problem is Bobby Slowick, first-time offensive coordinator. I just was not impressed with him in this game at all. Correct me if I'm wrong, Shaun. I'm not impressed. And that to me is just, that's offensive coordinator 101. Have your play ready so there isn't any miscommunication issues, because that's what it looked like. It looked like there was, they're trying to get the play in. I'm like, I never understand this. Why are you waiting to put a play in? Why don't you have a play set up when you walk out on the field? Your personnel, Shaun, already. When you walk out on the field, it's not like you're going to sneak personnel in and off at this point. This is 101 stuff.
Yeah. Maybe. I get it from the surface level on that sense, but you never know what's going on behind the scenes. And I guess, you have to imagine that they're trying, they understand what personnel they have on the field, certainly, or maybe they don't, because there was an instance in this game where Stroud's calling for another guy to come into the huddle, and you already had 11 guys in the huddle.
Either way, that's on Bobby Slowick. If it's if they didn't have the right personnel in for that particular play, which it didn't seem like guys were trying to run.
Everybody, Robert. It's on everybody.
It didn't look like guys were trying to run in and out of there.
Even if the play's not in, you gotta call a timeout. And I'm just telling you, while he called the timeout. I know he did, but it was late. And my point is that they didn't have to give it to him. It was late coming in.
I don't care about that. That's to me
talking semantics.
To me, he got the timeout. He got the timeout. Okay, he did the right. DeMeco was paying attention. Bill O'Brien would have probably been looking at his play card or something like that. He was paying attention, and the timeout was they gave it to him. So I'm not going to give him a mark off. This is all Slowick. This is a Slowick issue.
Well, yeah, Slowick had his issues. And in that particular instance, you got to have a play ready to go. You had the time to do it. We're talking really about two different things here. You're wanting to, kind of get the sword into Slowick a little bit. I'm just telling you, let's not totally ignore what DeMeco was doing in that instance. But yes, they all have their faults here. And he would just think that, okay, drive like that, Bobby Slowick is getting ready and has something in mind to quickly respond. And he didn't, apparently. So
yeah, that's my issue. Okay. I don't care about the timeout because it was done on time. I'm not going to argue over something that didn't happen.
Well,
so
but
I don't care about that.
It wasn't on time. That's all. That was my point, is it wasn't made on time.
The officials gave it to him. So that's all I care, Anyway, Josh Jones picks up a holding penalty, which kills that drive, his second holding penalty. Josh Jones did not look good at left guard, which is kind of what we thought. And the other thing about Josh Jones not looking good at left guard is what happens later. And I want to save that. Don't say anything about that. Don't spoil that yet, Sean. But Stroud throws a good pass on a third down scramble. Hard to tell if Robert Woods should have caught it, but I thought Stroud, again, the poise, he gets outside, they're coming after him. I mean, the stuff that he's had to get out of in the preseason, the regular season, it's crazy. And it's, you could say, well, he should have been able to, read something and throw it real quick. But the stuff that he's having to get out of, the rushes are instant. They're right on him in a second. Guys are running in unimpeded. But I thought he did a good job getting outside. And I couldn't tell, Sean, you tell me, did Robert Woods have a shot at that ball that he threw down there?
I mean, it was another low one. Woods and Brown, made some nice catches on some low balls by Stroud today. Should he have caught it? I mean, that was probably the lowest one that Stroud did throw to Woods. He'd made the catch earlier. He
loved Woods in this game. 10 targets. He caught 6 passes, 57 yards.
Sure. Give you props to Robert Woods for some really good route running. Woods was also probably one of the reasons why Stroud ended up taking one of those sacks. I think it was probably his first one for a significant loss there. Woods slipped off the line, but and he was probably the hot on that one. If I was just to kind of guess, because I remember thinking man, those route concepts just don't look, you're looking for one guy in that instance, and Woods, it looked like he was running like a little snag route just behind the linebackers. But no, I don't think he should have caught it. I just think that was a tough ball, and at least a really solid effort by Stroud to just get that ball out and give a guy somewhat of a chance. But because you'd seen Woods make that play before, it's just that was a tough ask. Kind of like the one that Noah Brown, people felt like Noah Brown should have made, earlier in the preseason, that sliding little attempt. Yeah. I mean, that's tough, and hey, look, you made one today.
Yeah. The Ravens fumble it on their possession. MJ Stewart falls on it. His second big play of the game. It was 2 turnovers for him, right, Sean?
MJ. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Texans with a chance to get back into it, but Stroud sacked on 1st and goal. That sack, well executed, delayed blitz by Roquan. We saw a couple of times, you mentioned this earlier, Sean, where Stroud maybe held the ball too long before he could get rid of it. What did you think about that one? Did he have a chance? Because Roquan was kind of hiding behind the offensive line. Do you feel like he could have gotten rid of it, or it was just all happened too fast for him?
Yeah, I mean, that was it turned out to be like a beautiful thing for the Ravens, because you mentioned, Roquan was kind of hidden behind the other defender, who was being blocked up pretty well. I guess in that instance, it was Jones, or maybe Mason it was, but it looked like just a delayed twist. That's how it turned out. And so Stroud steps up into the pocket because he doesn't see Roquan. And it's kind of like, man, damned if you do, damned if you don't, because it's a good job by Stroud, in his mind, extending the play from the pressure already coming. And, your O-line picks up that block. He steps up, and it's like, man, what are you going to do? You just didn't see Roquan there in that instance. I can't kill him for that. That was just kind of it was a really good play by the defense. But they had so many guys come free today. Clowney, it looked like he came free about 3 or 4 different times and ended up getting to Stroud at least twice, I think it was. And against this Ravens defense, to me, I have to just kind of dumb it down to the inability, if it's Patterson, if it's Mason, to just not being able to be on the same page with the line calls, not understanding what they're seeing from this defense. It happened far too often, much more in the first half. And then it looked like they kind of figured things out, and they were able to sustain that 9-minute drive. And it was like, okay, you figured some stuff out. You let your quarterback get into a rhythm, but there's just so many different things that Mike McDonald threw their way today. It was a good learning experience. I have to say that, if anything else, for this line and CJ Stroud.
Yeah. Learning experiences. Texans fans, again, probably sick of learning experiences. So the Texans defense, and you talked about the offensive line, because we're going to get to it, but their defense makes a stop. So Stroud, the offense, with one more decent chance, I would say. Mm-hmm. But after a big play past midfield to DeMeco, really well executed, a chunk play, George Fant on that play goes down with an injury.
Yeah.
John, I expected maybe you expected they bring in Michael Dieter, who you were right that they brought back up. Check one for Sean right here. He was right. They brought Dieter back up off the practice squad for the game, but they moved Josh Jones back to right tackle. And instead, I hear the broadcast crew say, Dieter's playing right tackle. And I thought, uh-oh. And guess who gives up the sack fumble on the next play is Dieter. And
Crazy.
this is I don't know whose call this is. I assume this is Bobby Slowick's call or the offensive line call. There was just some in-game stuff with Slowick and this offensive line, period, that coaching or whatever, that just, it felt like they were unprepared. They felt like they made some mistakes like on the fly. I hated that.
Yeah. It was for one play because Dieter flipped to left guard and Jones to right tackle the next series. So that told me that it is quite possible that it had to be a miscommunication in that instance. Granted, it's right after an injury, so you have time to digest what you're doing. It's not like, all right, go out there, hurry up, No, it was an injury. Okay, we're going to put Dieter in at right tackle. It'll be fine. We're going to run this.
Dieter didn't play tackle at all in the preseason. He played left guard. He's very comfortable, and he played left guard most of the time next to Jared Patterson, the guy that he was playing next to. So it just – and Josh Jones showed he was one of the better right tackles in football last year. I know I think they're going overboard trying to keep Josh Jones at the same position where it's like, no, you have a quarterback that is a rookie quarterback, and you're putting out a guy that you basically haven't played right tackle. And he's not really a right tackle. Maybe he's played it in his life, but that's not what he's done in the NFL. And so that to me says he's not a right tackle.
Well, he's not right because he hadn't played it. So he's just not. Dieter was a guard center, in Miami, and he's been a guard center here with the Texans, for the 6 months that he's been here. So I'm trying to talk myself through it as I'm watching this, and I'm like, okay, well, it's just gross negligence, malpractice, and flat out stupid if, in fact, they don't make this switch for the next series. They made the switch, but it was still curious to me why, when you had so much time to decide on what to do in that instance with Fant dealing with the injury and going down, why you roll the dice there. I don't understand it. That is certainly a question that has to be asked. And I'm sure by now it has been asked, hopefully, to DeMeco Ryans, why they made that decision when they did, why they did it. It can never happen again, because that is literally the epitome, the polar opposite, not the epitome, but the polar opposite of putting your players in the best possible situation to succeed. Thinking on the fly, it's very difficult in new roles, but to some degree, it's just the simple things, and you had time to make the right decision and you didn't. So hopefully this is one you can just kind of excuse away. You got lucky that nobody got hurt on that next play after Fant went down, and you can improve significantly on your decision-making on the fly going forward.
Yeah, Sean, I just thought we would see an offensive coordinator finally that I was a little bit more excited about. And I just did not see that. I was not happy with what I saw on the offensive side of the football from a coaching standpoint. On the defensive side of the football, I'm going to throw something out there for you. We talked about it before this game in our show the other day. Mm-hmm. I said, like, the key is the run game, and who stops the run game, and do the Texans look any better in the run game? Well, the run game itself for the Texans was not anything special. They got 72 rushing yards, 3.1 yards per carry. It was not good. Like I said, I would have liked to see more Dameon Pierce. I would have liked to see Dameon Pierce get into a rhythm. However, let's just go glass half full on this. There was 110 yards by the Ravens on 32 attempts. That means 3.4 yards per carry. For the worst rush defense in the NFL, this is progress.
Yeah, I thought it was significant progress, to be honest with you, because, run game or even the pass game, I mean, outside of that one ball to Zay Flowers where he was just wide open in the middle of a zone coverage, but probably a blown coverage at the end of the day, there just wasn't explosive plays, right? And that to me was the biggest thing. And while there worse missed tackles, those numbers, the rushing numbers against the Texans probably look a little bit worse. Instead of 32 for 110, you might be looking at 32 for 9 or, 28 for 90 or something like that, right? And you feel even that much better about it. You're going to have missed tackles in a game. It happens, but it's when it's just, over and over and over. And you can clearly see that, hey, man, this is an issue. This isn't just being out of position. This is maybe a question of you ain't got the right guy back there, or they're just being asked to do way too much. And I think, it just kind of compounds. Today was really encouraging, to be honest with you, in that regard. You take away the yards that Lamar, even just half, he was 6 carries for 38 yards and did most of that because the coverage was so damn good in the secondary. Did most of that because the pressure applied by the Texans defensive line was so good that he had to flush the pocket, escape, and try to extend a play. And I think even then there's areas to clean up where Anderson, knifes in. He's lined up as a 9 or a 7, and he attacks B gap, and then there's no backer to fill, the edge. There's nobody to sit and squeeze and stay home. You give the running lane away to Lamar Jackson in that instance. Those are things defensively that I think DeMeco can clean up, schematically, because what you saw today from guys like Anderson, from Jonathan Grenard, boy, how awesome was it to see him get into the backfield on the regular. Jerry Hughes, Denzel Perryman makes some plays. Jalen Petrie was a force, and I sure would like to have seen this thing play out with him on the field in the second half. I know MJ Stewart did some good things too, but Petrie, made some plays, caused Lamar Jackson to have to get rid of the football earlier than he wanted to when he'd come free on like a stab play, a blitz here and there. All things encouraging, in terms of stopping the run, imposing your will, and trying to make that an identity for yourself defensively. Yeah, definitely a good sign.
Yeah. And of course, the defense falls apart at the beginning of the third quarter after Jalen Petrie goes down. They also don't have Jimmy Ward for this game, which we should mention. So you're out your 2 starting safeties, which we were excited about. One thing you were definitely excited about for this team was they had 2 really good starting safeties. We figured that the secondary would be a real, that would be a real boon to this team. It would be one of the better parts of the team was the secondary. Mm-hmm. Now, Shaun, we got to talk about the offensive line because, Noel asked this question: is the team prepared to take more injuries to the O-line? He says George Dieter, he makes one of my cardinal errors and puts 2 guys together, but I know what he's talking about. Dieter at right tackle, scary thought. Yeah, we agreed on that. But you talk about, can they take more to the offensive line, Shaun? Who can take this much to the offensive line? They now have lost Quesenberry, their starting center. They've lost Juice Scruggs, their backup center. They've lost their starting left guard in Kenyon Green. They've lost their starting right tackle in Titus Howard. They've lost their backup tackle in Fant, and their other backup tackle, Jones, is playing guard. I mean, there's no team that can be prepared to lose 4 offensive linemen. It's just, you can't do that, especially when 2 of those guys are first-round picks and you're depending a lot on those, and another guy's a second-round pick.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can't afford to lose anybody else, especially for a significant amount of time, because Scruggs is out for a month. I don't know what the status of George Fant's going to be. Who knows? The main thing is you better make sure Dieter's healthy and Jones is healthy. You gave up a 5th-round pick to get Jones in. You got this whole next week now to probably make another shift and put him in a familiar position, and that's right tackle for him. So if Fant's out for any extended period of time, and hopefully he's not, because I like Fant at right tackle, you keep Fant at right tackle, you got Dieter at left guard, or maybe, after they look at this game, they still deemed that, Jones is going to be our left guard. I could even roll with that, as long as there's some sort of consistency here. I wouldn't kick the notion out of bed that maybe Dieter is the left guard going forward, and Jones is the right tackle. If Fant has to miss some time, you get a good solid week, and really by the time that these guys are coming back healthy, 3 weeks together, there's an opportunity to put something there. You're not going to face, again, a Ravens defensive line next week, okay? You've got the Colts, and then I think you got the Steelers coming up pretty soon. It's going to always be tough, but it ain't going to be as tough as what you face today. So I think to some degree, you have to be slightly encouraged that you're able to patch this thing together and get the result that you did today. And you almost got through 2/3 of the game, keeping CJ Stroud as clean as possible with just the one sack. And you could make the argument that that was kind of self-imposed, that he held the ball too long in that instance. But it was the hits, it was the pressures, and the inability to just create a rhythm because he was under the gun so much early on.
Steve says this won't be a playoff year. Got to get more help in the offseason. There's
Of course not.
nobody, not us, not anybody in Houston. Only your, Homer fans thought that they were going to be a playoff team. So we're not going to disagree with you there. Shaun, I want to just throw up some numbers for you. CJ Stroud, 28 of 44, 242 yards, 78 passer rating. Nothing spectacular, but he was okay in his first game. There's room for improvement, obviously. As far as the rushing yards, Dameon Pierce, 11 carries, 38 yards. CJ Stroud, 4 for 20. Like I said, Devin Singletary, 7 for 15 yards. Should he be getting the backup running back minutes at this point? I get it. He's the veteran. But what have we seen where this guy has shown any sort of juice or ability to see the hole in the last few weeks? I just don't see it right now.
I mean, you haven't seen it in the game. I've seen it plenty in practice. And the one comp, there's nothing because you didn't give Mike Boone any carries today. You used him as a pass catcher out of the backfield, and he didn't do that very well either. Granted, the one that he bobbled that he clearly should have had. I mean, so what? 4 yards in a pile of dust and I think that was a 3rd and long situation. There were many of those today for the Texans. What would it have really mattered anyway? But you didn't give Boone any opportunity to really do that either. So this is a big week of practice. Obviously, I thought it was pretty curious that, the Texans gave Pierce, felt like 2 straight series of rest offensively. And you kind of wondered, like, hey, where is this dude? Is he hurt? Is he banged up? What? No, they just figured they'd give a different look to Singletary. And I wonder why that is. That's another question that I'd be curious to have somebody ask today, certainly tomorrow in DeMeco's press conferences. What was the thinking behind that? Were you concerned that maybe Dameon, was struggling picking up a blitz, from the Ravens? Did you feel like you couldn't afford to have him out there in certain instances? Was he hitting the wrong hole? What were you seeing? So I'd be curious there, but it's definitely going to be a, work in progress because I think we all can agree that we liked what we'd seen from Mike Boone. There was even conversation that, maybe at some point this season, this dude is the backup running back to Dameon Pierce. But at the end of the day, it ain't going to make a hill of beans unless your offensive line can get on the same page. Like
I don't judge Devin Singletary by the offensive line. He's not getting hit in the backfield. There are places where I see he can get through. If you think that, that's fine. Put me in the other category. I don't feel like this is an offensive line issue with Singletary. I've seen a guy that he's not getting enough yards. By the way, this just in real quick. Aaron Wilson says that Petrie suffered a bruised lung. He was coughing up blood at one point, and he may remain overnight in Baltimore as a precautionary measure.
Yeah, that's tough. I think we could all agree it probably didn't happen on the pressure of Lamar Jackson. I thought the same thing, that had to be something where it was like, they need me for this play. I'm sticking it out. I made the play. Now I got to get out of here. Whatever happened earlier in that game, and it just became exacerbated as time went on. I don't know what situations, look like going forward when you have a lung injury and you're coughing up blood. But my God, hopefully, they handle that situation because this team's going to be hurting without Jalen Petrie in that secondary. MJ Stewart, serviceable today, created 2 turnovers. Made some nice plays, but you need Jalen Petrie back there. You need Jimmy Ward back there because having a veteran, you might not even have to throw to his side of the field. He might even be out of the picture on your screen. It's just, in a huddle, the knowledge that he can drop, like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Look out for this here. Make sure you get deeper in your drop. Make sure you carry your guy to the safety. Make sure you do this, that, and the other thing. Those are all invaluable things that you'd be missing without, both of those guys going forward. Hopefully they can both get back healthy for next week.
Our friend John Crumpler has these numbers on CJ Stroud. Against the blitz, he was 6 of 10, 67 yards, 80 passing rating. No blitz, 22 of 34, 175 yards, 77.5 passer rating. So he did pretty good against the blitz, considering his numbers are slightly better than they were against no blitz.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm kind of surprised to hear those numbers against the blitz. It didn't feel that way, right, when you're watching this one. But maybe I think that lends itself to, his poise and Robert Woods, his sure hands today. He came up with a lot of those, on third and long situations to extend drives for the Texans. And so it's good to have, that safety valve there. And did you hear Dalton Schultz's name called more than one time today on a little swing pass to him in the backfield? Because I sure didn't. And he was supposed to be said safety valve for CJ Stroud. Today it was Woods. We'll see what it looks like going forward.
Yeah, let me just go through those stats and just a bit here. Nico Collins, 6 catches, 80 yards. Robert Woods, 6 catches, 57 yards. Tank Dell, 3 for 34. Noah Brown, 3 for 20. Mike Boone, 3 for 18. A lot of that was that sort of mop-up drive at the end of the game. Dalton Schultz, only 2 catches, 4 yards. He had 4 targets. So, the Dalton Schultz that you were hoping was going to be a safety valve for him wasn't really. And I don't even know if Tank Dell was the safety valve. Robert Woods seemed to be the guy that he went to more often than not. So you don't know whether that's, Sean, a deal with CJ Stroud or if that's just how the offense was set up and that's what was available to him.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Schultz really isn't that surprising today because you knew you were anticipating, a heavy rush and, some exotic things from them defensively. So you keep Schultz in to be more of a blocker, block and release guy. And, we saw plenty of times today Stroud getting flushed from the pocket and probably just couldn't even think about him being a part of the equation. Woods running a lot of those, little stop in hot routes, crossing routes, out routes. That was going to be your best chance at times today. And Stroud made good more times than not on him. I thought it was curious all game long. Like I'd be interested to see the snap count totals for Tank Dell today. You probably count them on, I feel like maybe you need 3 hands. Maybe just 2. I don't know. I just didn't feel like you saw him near enough. I figured you'd make him an integral part of the game plan today because of the fear of you seeing this type of a rush. CJ being flushed from the pocket, asked to get rid of the ball very quickly. Dell has been that guy for CJ Stroud throughout training camp, throughout the preseason. And it made me question, like, man, what do they feel like Dell isn't prepared for? Because it sure doesn't look like they have issues with his route running. It sure doesn't look like they have issues with his ability to make plays with his hands as a receiver. He's gone up and got him, gone down and got him. Stroud's hit him in stride. Like, what is it? I think at the end of the day, a complete miss by Bobby Slowick in this Texans offensive game plan to not include Dell in it. And CJ Stroud in his first NFL game, it was just pretty unthinkable for me.
Now, Bobby Slowick's got to show up next week. That's for sure. Defensively, we talked about Grenard and MJ Stewart, but the leading tackler with 11 tackles, 6 solo, 1 tackle for loss was Denzel Perryman. Tavier Thomas had 8 tackles, 6 solo, 1 tackle for loss. Christian Harris, 6 tackles, 4 solo. Will Anderson, 6 tackles, 4 solo, a sack. He had a tackle for a loss and 2 quarterback hits. What about those 4 guys? What did you think about that?
Again, I think I mentioned Perryman earlier. He's that thumper, the man that this Texans defense the last few years had been missing. I really he is one of the most important players on this defense. There's no question about that. It's stopping the run, no question. And I thought he did a really good job today. Will Anderson, Jonathan Grenard, Jerry Hughes, I think, just impact players. I think this is the first time. Somebody said this stat earlier. It was in the broadcast. Will Anderson getting his first sack in his first ever NFL game. Like, how often does that happen? Apparently not very many times. I think it's maybe the first ever Texans rookie to get a sack on their first week of play. I don't even think J.J. Watt did that, but he was in the backfield in the first play of the game. The way that DeMeco has decided to use him, and there's going to be some adjustments, because I think if you're the Colts and, future Texans opponents, you're going to look and see what they did defensively today against the Ravens and think, you know what? Yeah, we can exploit this, especially if you have a mobile quarterback, because Anderson was asked today to just head down, go get the quarterback. And at times when he was asked to, attack B gap, they had no linebacker, no walk down safety, nobody there for outside contain. And that's where Lamar Jackson and their run game, whether it be Hill or Dobbins, really hurts you, especially down towards the red zone. So I think there's some things you can clean up there. But the most encouraging thing from the defense is that all of those guys that you just mentioned, and you probably left some off, they've got some impact players. And you just hope that you can return everybody that you started this game with today, that even played today, next week, because the Texans are going to need all of them. I think that in and of itself is going to help this offense, see a little bit more success, some shorter fields, because they got the propensity to make some plays, create turnovers, fumble, interceptions, and just cause havoc in the backfield.
Yeah, Jimmy Ward's supposed to be back next week by the reporting that we're hearing about. Luke on the comments, and we're about to close it down. So if you haven't said anything, we've been on for an hour. We've given you guys some time to talk. He asked, how long can the defense carry this team before their performance is affected? Yeah, I mean, we saw it last year. As the year went on, you felt, and the games went on, typically, the defense started to look worse because they're on the field the whole time. And Sean, we were just hoping something was going to be a little bit different. And again, I'm just going to go back to two things that we just keep harping on, but we harp on because it's where it all starts. The offensive line is in big trouble, and it's been in big trouble since we found out about all these injuries. Number one. Number two, I was hoping to see something more from Bobby Slowick than I saw in his first game. Yeah. And if I feel like I'm watching Pep Hamilton again by week 4 or 5, it's bad news for the Texans.
Yeah, it didn't feel like that to me, especially from the way that they used the personnel today. Outside of treating Tank Dell kind of like they did Dameon Pierce last year, that's got to change. You got to put your best players on the field, and you got to put them in the right positions to make plays the first time and every time. Bobby, Dieter, Jones, flip them, keep it there. As far as, that drive, I think, what was it, like 15 play, almost a 9-minute drive, right, where the Texans had to settle for 3 early in this game. To me, that almost extended this game by a quarter, because the defense, it was tough, man. You'd missed 4th down opportunities. They're busting their butt on short fields. And, I mean, they're making plays, but how long can that be sustainable for? It's a good question by Luke, because now you're a little bit more banged up. You were already banged up, missing Robert Woods, which was huge in this game.
You mean not Robert Woods?
Not Robert Woods, but Jimmy Ward. You were already missing Jimmy Ward for this game. Now you got to hope that Jalen Petry's, going to be at full strength next week. I don't know if he is. I don't know how quickly a freaking lung heals. You're coughing up blood from. I don't know. But there are always things that, guys, that you play it out and you see them on the injury report the following couple of days. They need to be healthy defensively, but I think you've got plenty of veterans here, plenty of young guys that are playmakers. It can be sustainable for quite a bit, but you need Bobby Slowick and CJ Stroud to gain some consistency. The most encouraging thing, I guess, because you mentioned Pep Hamilton, I don't know how many games it took, Robert, last season. Let's just talk about last season, because that's when you finally at least had some dudes that you knew were going to be a part of the future, right? Guys like Dameon Pierce, particularly on offense. How many games did we go before we saw a sustained drive? Like, I feel like you had to get about 3 or 4 weeks into the season before you saw any semblance of like a rhythm with this offense. The fact that you saw it today earlier in the game, where your quarterback, he's getting rushed, he's not seeing success. It looks like it's going to be a terribly long day for him. And you really started to kind of worry about his health because somebody's going to lay the wood if they get into the backfield. And the last guy you wanted it to be was Jadeveon Clowney if he comes free again to put CJ Stroud in the dirt. Stroud stayed calm, cool, collected. They sustained a drive. It only resulted in 3 points, but it extended the game, in my opinion, by at least a quarter because it gave your defense a chance to kind of relax, catch their breath, figure some things out schematically. And how huge was it late in the game where you felt like, last gasp before I think it was the third to last series for the Texans offensively. DeMeco dialed up a hell of a pass rush, 3 straight downs. Lamar had trouble getting rid of the ball. They ended up sacking him. Will Anderson, that was the drive where he got his first sack. I mean, it was huge. And to me, that doesn't happen if these guys are just blitzed and they're just gassed and they can't do it, right? So I think those are some kind of encouraging signs. You have a good foundation to build off of right here. Like, you're frustrated. You don't want to talk about like, well, it's just going to take time, and maybe Slowick is a concern a little bit for you right now. The real concern is if they look like this, maybe a little worse next week. Okay, when they come home, that to me is when you should be concerned, because anything outside of like an absolute dusting, a blowout today, I don't think you could be really too upset with. And you wanted to come out as healthy as possible, and hopefully the Texans minus, Jalen Petrie and George Fant did.
Yeah, well, that's not as healthy as possible, because all that is your starting right tackle and your veteran leader or not your veteran, but your young, talented leader on defense, along with, Jimmy Ward, who's your veteran leader on defense.
Yeah.
So those.
Oh, we don't know did they ever say what Fant's hurt with specifically?
I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, I haven't either. But you do know this: it's not soft tissue with Petrie. Okay, I mean, it's a lung, but we've at least heard stuff like that before from players. And if he's out a week, then I guess you'll take it. But just at least no soft tissue. And the Texans have been obliterated by soft tissue injuries in preseason so far. So the fact that you don't have any of those things to worry about is a good sign.
Yeah, you asked about. You didn't think we saw a sustained drive last year until game 3 or 4. First game of the season last year against the Colts, second quarter, they had a 14-play, 69-yard drive. That also ended up in a Kyamie Fairbairn field goal. So very similar drive, same quarter, the whole 9 yards. So,
Shame on me for not remembering a field goal drive. My bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was all this drive was a field goal.
Good job
drive.
Looking it up. Did you actually look that up?
Yeah, I just looked it up. Also, you just screwed up that thing. So we gotta give you some props where you deserve the props. You predicted the score. The final would be 27-13 a couple of days ago, 25-9. So pretty much on the money with that.
Yeah. If I was Price is Right, I'd have the under, right? So
well, did you go to Vegas with that? Because that you would have picked you would have had the Ravens in the spread.
Yeah, I don't have any money, so no. It takes money to make money, so I'm screwed on that regard. But it literally played out how I thought it would, minus just my score prediction. Like the game was within reach for the bulk of it, and it was just at the end of it, you were going to see that this was not as deep, not as talented of a group as the Ravens, nor should you have expected it to be. Maybe look, you could make the argument the Texans, they should have benefited more earlier from the Ravens' ill-disciplined play defensively. Certainly the 9 penalties cost them 82 yards. If you're going to, hold Lamar Jackson to what you did in the first half, just running the football with the run defense and even him scrambling, you probably would have liked to at least put a touchdown on the board or another field goal in that instance. But that's the price you pay when you go for it, where you do on 4th and 1s and you give up short fields to a Ravens team at home. It's difficult. They rolled the dice. They lost. We'll see how DeMeco and this team handle it going forward.
Yeah, just a quick response to what you were saying about the game being close. Yeah, you're within 2 touchdowns midway through the third. But what's the Ravens scored those 2 touchdowns with the way this offense looked and the way that, the way they've looked the last 2 or 3 years. My feeling was that's when the game was over. So I don't know. I just didn't feel like this game. You could say the game. You could say most NFL games are close. 95% of them are close. If you want to go by that factor, but I just didn't feel like the game was within reach once they scored that third touchdown and basically, sort of put the Texans in the rear view mirror.
Insurmountable. It was going to be insurmountable. There's going to be a play, that they make that it keeps it away. But don't compare anything that you see this year to the last 2 years, because I mean, it's different. They're actually trying to win this year. They're not trying to do a damn thing the last 2 years.
No. The players and the coaches, as we always say with this stuff in the NFL, they're always trying to win. But, it was just as ugly to me. This game was just as ugly as the games last year. It felt just as hopeless a lot of times as last year. There was coaching that I thought was just as egregiously bad as I saw last year. I don't want to say, I'm not going to sit here in front of everybody on our show and say, look, man, this is totally different. I see totally different than last year. No, I don't. And that's what I was hoping to see. I have hope because I do like more of the players.
I think you have to acknowledge
the coaching, and the execution, I don't like. And we acknowledged good last year, but you weren't in the game. And when by the middle of the third quarter, you weren't in the game. And I'm sorry. I'm not going to give you a good pat on the butt. I'm not going to give the old DeMeco, we gave it a good college try and stay positive and all that sort of stuff. I want to see some better execution and I want to see some better coaching overall, not just, this is not a player thing for me. This is about particularly the coaching and the execution.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about what we saw most improved maybe, and that's the run defense. I would just say the tenacity, the consistent feeling that, this defense can make a play. Even without Jalen Petrie on the field, it was just, look at MJ Stewart, making a play on Jackson, be Jackson very careless with the football, you did what you were supposed to do. You give it an effort, you punch the ball out, you fall on it. Great job. That's an encouraging thing. Like, you're always, if you're going to talk about the negative, you're always going to be able to compare, we saw this last year, this, that, the other thing last year. It's just about consistency. It's the first game, tough one on the road. If this becomes a common thread, then that's when I become concerned. That's when I become a little bit more frustrated, because you have to then talk about a sample size that is increasing and not one that is just 4 quarters old at this point in time. So I'm not concerned in that regard. It's just a lot of new going in. Your expectations were next to nothing to begin with. And I think that being the case, you have to be encouraged with some things that you saw on both sides of the ball. It's personnel, an issue. The lack of personnel, an issue. The way you're using or not using personnel, an issue. Yeah, those are all similar things that we had problems with for a long time last season. Hell, I think it took till week 8 before Dameon Pierce was in a high leverage situation on a football field to make a play for you when it actually mattered. Tank Dell's kind of a similar situation this year. They took Dameon Pierce out for at least a drive or two today, and it was like, man, you really need this guy out there. I've seen enough of Devin Singletary right now. At least let me put somebody out there that can bowl somebody over and get some yak. So I'm like, yeah, those are issues, but let's see what this week looks like, what next week looks like, and then I kind of go from there. But I think definitely you got to be looking at everybody right now if you're DeMeco Ryans, and even at himself. I don't think it was near as bad as what it could have been. There's, at the end of the day, encouraging signs going forward. And I'm just glad this team, this organization's in a different place, on a different page, maybe in a different book than they've been in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I'll just close it out by just totally disagreeing with Shaun and saying it's not as bad
Shocker.
as it could have been. to me, does no good for the Texans fans that have been watching this for the last 3 years. Not as bad as it could have been. It could have been worse many games the last 2 years, and it wasn't. That's not what we're aiming for. We're not aiming to end the broadcast every night on our live show saying it's not as bad as it could have been. And that's not what we're aiming for. But we'll wrap it up. Me and Sean will talk more around the middle of the week, Wednesday or Thursday. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you're subscribed. We want to hear from you. We want to get more people in the comments after these games. We want to hear from you guys what you think. But if you didn't get a chance on the live show, get in the comments on the recorded show for sure, because we will definitely make a note of it. We'll bring it up if it's something worth bringing up, and we'll definitely reply if it's something worth replying to. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll talk to you again really soon.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, you can support the show by subscribing on YouTube and commenting on the videos. Listen to Houston Sports Talk on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and Google. Don't forget to tell a friend and share our show on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.